The very first image Ryan Coogler gives you in Sinners is a young man walking into a church carrying a broken guitar and bearing a scar that wasn't there before. And before you know a single character's name, before you know this is a vampire movie, before you know anything, the film tells you what it wants you to know, that someone walked into the darkness whole and came back marked. On the surface, Sinners is a vampire film set in 1932 Mississippi. Michael B. Jordan plays twin brothers Smoke and Stack, who return from Chicago to open up a juke joint. But on the night they open it, an ancient Irish vampire named Remick shows up at the door, drawn by the transcendent blues music of their young cousin Sammy. What follows is a night of blood and fire. But if that's all you see, you're watching with one eye closed. Sinners is one of the most densely symbolic films in recent memory, right up there with Weapons. Every character, every set piece, every musical cue carries layers of meaning. And in this video, I'm going to unpack 3 of those layers. The film's message on identity and its consumption, its structural obsession with dualism, and its dense biblical symbolism. Let's get into it. Let's start with what the vampires actually represent, not in political terms, but in existential ones. Remick and his horde don't just want blood. The blood is incidental. What they want is you. Your memories, your music, your sense of self. They want to absorb who you are. When Remick turns someone into a vampire, that person doesn't simply die. They're plugged into a collective consciousness, a hive mind where memories, knowledge, and experience are shared. On paper, that sounds almost utopian, and Remick pitches it that way. He promises freedom from persecution, equality, and community. He looks at the people barricaded inside the juke joint, people who are living under Jim Crow, people who can't walk freely in their own town, and says that, I can fix this. I am your way out. But the cost is everything that makes you, you. When people outside the juke joint are turned, they don't keep dancing to the blues. They're dancing an Irish jig. They're singing Remick's Irish songs. The hive mind doesn't merge and blend cultures, it usurps them and replaces them. It flattens every individual into a single homogeneous expression of the one who made them, in this case, Remick. But here's the thing that elevates this beyond a simple villain does bad shit story. Remick is not a hypocrite. He's a victim and a mirror. He is the product of the exact same process he's inflicting. He tells Sammy that his own ancestral lands were stolen, that Christianity was forced on his people, that St. Patrick came in and cut down the pagan groves and chased all the snakes out of Ireland and all that bullshit, that his language and traditions were consumed by a colonizing power. His Irish identity was devoured, and in his grief and rage, instead of rebuilding what was lost, he became the thing that destroyed him. He perpetuates the cycle. And this is what makes Sinners' central horror so unsettling. It's not that evil comes from outside and attacks you, it's that the consumed become the consumers. Pain, when left unresolved, doesn't just hurt, it replicates. Remick isn't evil just because of where he comes from. He's evil because of what was done to him, and terrifying because of what he chooses to do with that power. Against this, the juke joint stands as Sinners' counter-argument. Club Juke is not just a political statement. It's not just for them, by them. It's something more fundamental than that. It's a space where people get to be themselves. They drink, they dance, they flirt, they fight, they fornicate. They play music that expresses who they are fundamentally and where they come from. The juke joint is not a utopia. It's far from that. It's messy and imperfect and loud and crass, but it's real and transcendent. And the music that Sammy plays there does something even more miraculous. It doesn't erase individual identity the way that Remek's hive mind does, but instead it summons spirits from across time, ancestors past and generations future, who join the celebration as holy themselves. Whether it's African dancers or Chinese performers or DJs at turntable, they all appear, each in their own tradition, all participating in the same moment. It's communion without the consumption. And that is the film's thesis on identity in a single scene. Authentic community accentuates who you are, whereas counterfeit community, the kind of community imposed on you by a colonizing power like Christianity, devours it and replaces it with something alien. If identity is the theme, dualism is the structure. Sinners is built entirely on these paired oppositions, and once you start noticing them, you kinda can't stop. And they map onto the same fundamental question. When two things look identical, how can you tell which one gives life and which one drains it? Let's start with the twins themselves. Together, they form Smokestack. Apart, they're incomplete. They're identical in appearance, but opposites in temperament. Smoke is quiet, watchful, and pragmatic. He handles weapons, he reads threats, he speaks slowly and means every word, whereas Stack is warm, convivial, charming, and he handles people, he keeps momentum going, he reads the room, and he lets people in, literally and even figuratively. Even their costumes encode this binary. Stack wears red, a flashier fedora, a bolder suit influenced by the Italian mob he worked for in Chicago, whereas Smoke wears blue, simpler, more restrained, echoing the Irish gangsters he was connected to. Warm and cool, expressive and reserved, outward and inward. Coogler described their dynamic as a riff on Cain and Abel, but with a twist. What if instead of one brother killing the other, they were so close that nothing could come between them? And for most of the film, nothing can. They're complementary. But Stack's openness, the very quality that makes him the more community-minded brother, is what gets him bitten. When Mary comes back inside and he lets her in, he lets her close. His generosity is his vulnerability. And the film is making a quiet argument that the traits that make you good at building community are the same traits that make you exploitable by forces that mimic community. And the twins are just the beginning of these paired oppositions. The entire film is structured around binaries that clash against each other. The church and the Juke Joint. Both are gathering places. Both involve music and celebration. Both promise transcendence. Both have someone standing at the front door telling you how to live. The film refuses to declare one holy and the other sinful, but instead asks, which one actually lets you be you? And the Juke Joint is where Sammy's music summons ancestral spirits from across time. The church is where his father tells him to put down the guitar. The so-called House of Sin is where the spirit moves. And the so-called House of God is where the spirit is caged in shame, guilt, and scripture. The preacher and his son. Sammy's father sees the blues as the devil's music. He sees the Juke Joint as a den of sin. He tells Sammy to denounce his gift. But the film shows us that Sammy's music achieves something more genuinely spiritual than anything the pulpit could deliver for him. His father offers doctrine, but Sammy offers transcendence. North and South. Chicago promised opportunity but delivered the same oppression, just in taller buildings. Mississippi is home for Smoke and Stack, but for them, home is where the clan owns the land you walk on. Neither North nor South offer safety. The Juke Joint is the twins' attempt to build something in between, a liminal space that belongs to them on their terms, and it only lasts a single night. Living and dead, day and night. In the post-credits scene, Stack tells Sammy that the night at the Juke Joint was the last time he ever saw his brother, the last time he saw the sun, and the only time in his life he ever felt truly free. Freedom belongs to daylight, to mortality, to life, to being alive. The moment he crosses into undeath, that's gone forever. He gains eternity and loses everything he fought for and lived for. Paganism and Christianity. Paganism and Christianity is one of the film's quietest but most potent dualities. Remmick's entire backstory is defined by it. His pagan Irish homeland was consumed by Christianity, his father's land stolen, and his traditions erased. Christianity in the film isn't presented as a straightforward good. Sammy's father wields it like a cage, demanding his son abandon his gift of music. Annie's hoodoo practice, rooted in older pre-Christian spiritual traditions, is what actually protects characters. Her garlic, her talismans, her knowledge of the supernatural lets them know how to fight the vampires. The Lord's Prayer is useless against Remmick. However, Annie's African folk practices are potent. Meanwhile, Remmick himself sits in the impossible space between Christianity and paganism. He despises the Christians that destroyed his pagan world, yet he's become something worse than either. An ancient creature who has outlived every spiritual tradition and now feeds on all of them. The film doesn't champion paganism over Christianity or vice versa, but it suggests that both can be authentic vessels for the sacred, and both can be hollowed out and weaponized. What matters isn't which tradition you want to practice, it's whether that practice connects you to your most authentic self or severs you from it. All of these binaries ultimately feed into the film's master opposition. Both Sammy's transcendental music and Remmick's hive mind offer the same promise, connection to something larger than yourself. But they operate by opposite mechanisms. Sammy's music creates communion while preserving individuality. Each spirit across time joins the dance as themselves, whereas Remmick's immortal hive mind offers belonging but demands the annihilation of self. Same packaging, but opposing contents. They can look identical from the outside, just like the twins, but one gives life and the other drains it. And that's the structural argument Coogler is making with every single binary in this film. The challenge isn't spotting evil when it looks evil. The challenge is spotting it when it looks like exactly what you need. Never thought I'd be making a YouTube video and uttering these words, but now let's talk about scripture, because Sinners is soaked in it. This isn't a film that borrows a couple of Christian motifs and uses them for flavor. It's built on a biblical framework that runs from Genesis to Revelation. And the most fascinating thing about it is that it's not a linear salvation narrative, it's cyclical. The same archetypes repeat, the same falls happen, the same marks are passed from one bearer to the next. Let's start with the obvious one, of Remmick as Lucifer. Remmick's introduction is a visual quotation of Satan's fall. He appears to have dropped from the sky, scorched and disoriented, crashing to earth like a fallen angel. The camera angle is deliberate. It doesn't confirm he fell, but the visual language insists on it. This isn't just a vampire arriving to the corporeal, it's a moral descent made physical. And the Lucifer parallels go deeper than just the entrance. In certain Judeo-Christian traditions, Lucifer was the angel in charge of music. Ezekiel 28:13 references timbrels and pipes prepared within him. So when Remmick fixates on Sammy's gift, he's not just a predator drawn to talent. He's a fallen angel trying to reclaim dominion over an art form he considers originally his. He doesn't want to silence Sammy's music, but he wants to co-opt it. And Remmick's rhetoric is blasphemous in a Christological sense. He tells these survivors barricaded inside the Juke Joint, "I am your way out." That's a direct inversion of John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Remmick positions himself as an antichrist, offering counterfeit salvation. His promise of heaven on earth is a parody of the gospel, and his death completes the iconography. When smoke stakes him and then dawn breaks, Remmick doesn't simply burn. He erupts in a pillar of flame, a tornado of fire. And in the Old Testament, God appears as a pillar of fire to guide the Israelites to freedom. Here, the pillar of fire marks the destruction of a false guide, a counterfeit liberator. It's the same image but inverted. Where God's fire leads to promised land, Remek's fire is his utter annihilation. One of the film's most harrowing scenes is the confrontation at the river. Remek drags Sammy into the water, and as Sammy recites the Lord's Prayer, Remek joins him, not because the words repel him, but because he knows them. He explains that Christians used this prayer when they colonized and absorbed his people. The words are familiar and they bring him comfort, and they are powerless against him. Then Remek dunks Sammy beneath the water 3 times, a form of baptism. But this is baptism inverted, because true baptism represents death of the old self and resurrection into a new life. Remek's baptism represents the death of the self and the absorption into his collective. The water doesn't cleanse, it drowns. The prayer doesn't save. It's been hollowed out, weaponized, stripped of its power by centuries of misuse. And there's a very cutting theological echo here. In Matthew 4, Satan tempts Christ in the wilderness by quoting scripture. The devil knows the words. He can speak them fluently, but he uses them to beguile and for consumption, not for communion. Remek reciting the Lord's Prayer alongside Sammy is the right gesture. The words are right, but the force behind the words is annihilating rather than transcendent. The favored and unfavored brother. Genesis is full of brother stories, and none of them end well. Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, Ishmael and Isaac. In every case, one brother is favored of the Lord and the other falls. The pattern is so consistent, it functions as a biblical law of gravity. Smoke and Stack map directly onto this archetype. Smoke is the older twin, serious, protective, and grounded. Stack is the younger, charming, warm, and more willing to take risks. And it's Stack who falls. He's seduced through love and desire, bitten by the woman he loves and who he can't resist, turning into the thing that hunts his own brother. It's a story as old as Eden. The fall begins with desire. But Coogler subverts the archetype in a crucial way. In Genesis, when Cain falls, he murders Abel. The unfavored brother destroys the favored one. Here, Smoke, arguably the favored brother, the survivor, cannot bring himself to kill Stack. He lets him go. He chooses mercy over the biblical pattern. And that single act of grace is what makes the post-credits reunion possible 60-odd years later. Instead of fratricide, you get an agonized love that outlasts death itself. The archetype bends, but doesn't break. The Mark of Cain. This is where the biblical framework reaches its deepest resonance. In Genesis 4, after Cain kills Abel, God marks him. The Mark of Cain is not solely punishment, it's also protection. It says, this person has encountered ultimate evil, has been changed by it, and no one may destroy him. He's cursed to wander, but he's also untouchable. Sammy walks out of the night with Remek's claw marks scarring his face. It's the very first thing we see in the film, a young, marked man returning from the wilderness. Like Cain, he's been irrevocably changed by his encounter with evil, and like Cain, he can't go back to what was and to what he was. His father tells him to put down the guitar. He can't re-enter the world of simple piety. He's seen too much. He's been marked. But here's where your reading of the cyclical nature of this symbolism gets genuinely profound. Remek bears a mark too. He was cast out of his pagan paradise when Christianity consumed his homeland. He was marked by vampirism, his own version of the Mark of Cain, and now he wanders the earth, unable to return home, trying to build what he lost. Remek is Cain before Sammy. Remek's exile came first. His mark came first. And what he does with that mark, consume others and replicate the violence that was done to him, is the cautionary tale within the cautionary tale. And then in the post-credits scene, Stack and Mary visit the elderly Sammy and offer to turn him. They're offering to pass the mark on again. The cycle wants to continue, and Cain's curse wants another host. And Sammy says no. He chooses mortality. He chooses to die as himself rather than live forever as something hollowed out and counterfeit. He breaks the cycle. The mark stays on his face, but the cycle ends with him. The Juke Joint as Eden. The Juke Joint, for its single night of existence, is a kind of paradise. It's full of color and music, joy, community, and desire. Sammy describes it as feeling like home. It's the first place he's fully himself, but like Eden, it doesn't stay untouched. The serpent arrives at the gate, and the serpent can't enter without an invitation. That's the theology of free will encoded in vampire lore. Evil requires your participation. Every breach of the Juke Joint's walls comes from a human choice. Mary's desire, Grace's fear, Stack's love. These are the film's version of reaching for the fruit. Not stupid choices, but human ones, made for human reasons. But they open the door to something that devours everything inside. Smoke sacrifice. After dawn breaks and the vampires burn, Smoke sends Sammy away. Then he stays behind, alone, and waits for the clan. He fights them single-handedly. He kills every last one of them, and then he dies from his wounds. In his final moments, he sees a vision of his late wife and his daughter. This is a redemptive sacrifice in the most classical biblical sense. Smoke lays down his life so that Sammy, the bearer of his culture's music, its memory, its future, can live. He's not a Christ figure in the sense of being sinless, far from it. He's stolen, killed, he's abandoned people he loved, but he is a Christ figure in the structural sense, the one who takes on death so that others might continue. And the vision of his wife and daughter suggests something like grace. So what is Sinners actually about? It's about the difference between communion and consumption, and how they can promise the same thing and deliver opposite results. It's about the fact that the very qualities that make you a generous, loving, and open person can be the same ones that make you vulnerable to forces that feed on those same nice qualities. It's about dualism, how every good thing in the film has a dark mirror. The church and the Juke Joint, the preacher and his son, the living and the undead. Two brothers identical in appearance but opposite in fate. And it's about the biblical architecture of sin and grace, of fallen angels who recite scripture, and baptisms that drown rather than save. A mark passed from one wanderer to the next across centuries. The favored brother and the fallen brother, locked in a love that transcends even the grave. And at the center of it all, a young man with a scar on his face and a broken guitar in his hand who walks into his father's church and refuses to let go. Sammy breaks the cycle. He doesn't pass the mark on. He doesn't become or blame what hurt him. He takes the curse and transforms it into music. He takes the scar and wears it for a lifetime. And when Stack offers him eternity, one final chance to live, to join the hive, to surrender himself, Sammy says no. Not as a vampire. Not as a vessel for someone else's grief and longing. He just wants to be Sammy and die Sammy. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. If you liked this video, like down below, comment, subscribe. Tell me what your observations of Sinners were. I'm Goblinsberg, and I will see you in the next one.